Um, well, first of all, welcome to the Classical Forum for Contemporary Issues, um, which was designed to explore every possible contemporary issue. But since nobody, except for me, invites anyone to speak here, I tend to invite people who I know, and they all seem to be focused on Israel, which is fine with me. And I hope it's okay with you guys because it's a pretty major topic nowadays. I know Raphael from really incredible. I mean, I was just blown away by his his posts on Facebook and with Dillip together. They both have just blown me away. Raphael, just day after day, ever insightful. I want him to make a book of his pitgams, his phlegma. How do you say that in English?
Aphorisms.
Aphorisms. His aphorisms are incredible. He posted today he will be speaking. He is a, as you probably read in our announcement, he's had a very interesting array of experiences, having come to Israel and learned at Hebrew University, having spent time in Orthodox yeshivas over here, and gotten a sense of the of what people over there are thinking. He's also studied Islam and is teaching in Berlin in classrooms which have a large number of Muslims. His incredibly interesting perspective on some of the most important things going on today. And I hope that you will tell a few jokes during your talk, Raphael, because I'll be very disappointed otherwise. So please, Raphael, without any further
Yeah.
words, please.
Thank you very much, Gabriel, for hosting me. Thank you very much, Sophia, for organizing the logistics of all this. And thank you, all of you, for devoting an hour of your precious time to listening to me, even though I don't have an academic position or a PhD. And I'm actually, credential-wise, very much below all of you. So thank you very much again. You got the title of the speak, Isaac and Ismail, and I realize this topic is so large, so huge that to do justice to the topic would be impossible, let alone in 1 hour, even in 1 week or even 1 month. So I decided to narrow it down. And the title of the talk is Isaac and Ismail, a Tale of Two Cousins. And I'd like to clarify a few points. First of all, that I want to focus on the positive because despite all the many reasons we have to feel pessimistic about the relationship between the children of Abraham and their descendants, it's a very Jewish thing and also a very Islamic thing in the noble sense of the term to look to the positive side of life as an expression of our gratitude to the Almighty. So that's one point. The second point is that I will base my talk and my points on anecdotal rather than academic evidence because my wealth is my life experience, not necessarily the research or specialty I have in Jewish studies or Islamic studies. And as I said, my sources are mainly my experiences as an former Muslim, my experiences living and working in Jerusalem and the West Bank, and my experiences as a teacher in a state school in Berlin, where around half of the pupils are Muslim. And to focus on the positive, I'm now going to share my screen. Yeah, yeah. Okay, now is it now
Yes.
okay? Okay, great. So let me see 1 second. Here, I'm trying to get this sorted out. Okay. So first of all, I think that one virtue of Muslims and especially the Arab Muslims is that they have very high interpersonal skills. And I'd like to provide source like from the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad, who said the most complete of the believers in faith are those with the best manners. So good manners or adab are very important in the Muslim world. And here is a summary by Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghuda, who wrote about the role of etiquette and Islamic manners in Arab culture. I'll read aloud. Good manners, adab, are central to the Arab and Islamic tradition. In the Arab world, politeness, hospitality, and respect for others are essential components of everyday life. These values are deeply rooted in Islamic teachings and cultural norms. Good manners are seen as a reflection of one's character and upbringing and they foster social harmony, strengthen relationships, and honor both the individual and the community. Respect for elders, kindness to guests, and careful speech are all considered virtues that maintain dignity and respect in interactions. Now, why do I point this out? Because I think that the good manners and the very good interpersonal intelligence of most Muslims have been a decisive factor in tempering hostility to Islam and anti-Muslim bigotry in the Western world. I mean, on a purely statistical basis, there are very many reasons to think that Muslim communities are underachievers, but I would say when you speak to people, they all have very good interactions with Muslims as colleagues, as shop owners, and as even on random encounters on buses, on the street. So there's this. There's this bad news that Islam generates in news, but in everyday life, I think that most people in the West have very good experiences when they deal with Muslims on a one-to-one basis. And I think the reason for this is the a very highly developed savoir-faire, like in human interactions, that Islam instills and that Muslims have usually mastered pretty well. And I can say that as a teacher, my most pleasant experiences or interactions are with Muslim students, even though at the same time, some of the most hardest and most frustrating ones are also with Muslim students. So here are, for example, some rules in Sharia that elaborate exactly how one must behave. For example, when visiting someone's home, of course, one should seek permission before entering a house. One should knock 3 times and wait for a response. If there is no response, leave without insisting. Then one should stand to the side of the door rather than directly in front to respect privacy. And the basis of this Sharia regulation is the Quran Ayah Surah Nur, which says, "Do not enter houses other than your own without permission and greet their inhabitants." So basically, just like the rabbis, the Islamic scholars developed concrete rules that to apply general injunctions of the Quran and also of the Sunnah. For example, also good manners in eating are very important in the Muslim world. From Western etiquette, we also know that you shouldn't begin eating until the host invites you or everyone is served. Then one should avoid eating while lying down or reclining. So this is something that you, scholars of the classic world, should really take to heart because, as we know, it's not healthy to eat lying down or reclining in a triclinium. Understood. So please, the Muslims are clearly ahead of the classic Greco-Roman world in this respect. Chewing with your mouth closed is obviously something that we also share in the West, and avoid making unnecessary noises. Do not waste food. This has its parallel in Judaism, tashhit, and eating in moderation. So there's a hadith, a saying of the Prophet that says, "Eat and drink, but do not be excessive. Indeed, Allah does not like those who are wasteful." So this is a second point where concrete rules color everyday life of devout Muslims, and it has influenced the whole Muslim culture. Giving and receiving gifts. Of course, you should accept gifts with gratitude, even if the gift is small. Of course, you should avoid boasting about it, but I find this rule very nice of using both hands when offering or receiving a gift. And this is something that if we incorporate in our everyday life, I think will make both the people who receive and give and our gifts and us even more happy. So here is this hadith. I think you can I mean, I don't need to read it, but it's very powerful because gifts increase your love for one another. And this is actually contrary to the Jewish tradition, where I have the impression that gifts are frowned upon and seen as a subtle form of bribery or of, corruption. Um, and then there's the second virtue, which is sense of loyalty to kith and kin. On the left, you have someone who's pretty infamous in my eyes. Can anyone recognize him? Gabriel, do you know who he is? It's Shlomo Zand. Okay, Shlomo Zand is an Israeli um, scholar in quotation marks who wrote a book, The Invention of the Jewish People, where he basically claims that there's no such thing as Jewish peoplehood, that Zionists are all evil racists, and he was basically officially renounced as Judaism. His latest book was one basically saying that French intellectuals have gone from anti-Semitism to Islamophobia, and two of three of the targets of his animals were happen to be themselves Jews, fellow Jews, or in his case, ex-fellow Jews. So on the rest is Bassam Eid, who's a very nice man. He is actually one of the few Palestinians that takes a very balanced perspective and is ready to talk to Jewish audiences abroad and be a host of pro-Israel organizations, and that is why he's considered basically a mercenary or a Zionist prostitute in the eyes of his fellow countrymen. On the other hand, I heard him talk, and I can assure you that in Berlin, he's devoted at least half of his speech to criticizing Israel and to criticizing the mistakes of successive Israeli governments. And I think the reason is because, as we will see, in Arab and Muslim culture, you never talk bad about your own kith and kin in front of outsiders. And I don't think, even if Bassam Eid is willing to get invited to Berlin to speak before a pro-Israel audience, that he will basically surrender this upbringing and the socialization, which involves basically always defending the reputation and the honor of the people who are closest to you. So now I'm going to illustrate this with a few hadiths. For example, the Prophet Muhammad says, "The one who severes the ties of kinship will not enter paradise." And here below is an Arab aphorism, which is very well known. Excuse my atrocious Arab pronunciation. Anna wa akhi ala ibn ummi wa anna ibn ummi ala aghrarib. I and my brother against my cousin, and me and my cousin against a stranger. So I have to say that being in Jerusalem, I notice the clear difference between the attitudes of Arab Muslims and Jews in this respect. I have had several very intense friendships with Muslims, and I can assure you that even in the most intimate moments, they will never talk badly of any of their close relatives. And even of their distant relatives, they will only do so with great caution and after they know you very well. On the other hand, I've been in taxis in Jerusalem where the Jewish taxi driver, after 5 minutes, complains to me about the conjugal performance of his spouse, which is something which is absolutely shocking to Muslims and which is something would never happen, I think, in the Muslim world, especially with vis-a-vis a complete stranger as a taxi like client. So here
Okay, Raphael, I just
yes.
want you to know that most Jewish people probably wouldn't do that either.
I know, but I'm just shocked because it's an extreme like example of an attitude that I find that wherein unfortunately Jews are very prone to bad mouthing fellow Jews even in front of outsiders, and that's one of the points where you realize that Jew trusts you because he starts talking about fellow Jews like an anti-Semite, which is something I still find very shocking and actually upsetting. But it's something that, if I talk to most Israelis, I'd imagine that Israelis are the worst people in the world because even though my experiences there have been very wonderful, Israelis speak of their fellow countrymen as if they were all like, no comment. So loyalty to fellow Muslims is very deeply seated in Muslim culture. There's a hadith by the Prophet that says, "Whoever defends the honor of his brother, Allah will defend his face from the hellfire on the day of resurrection." All these quotations are from the different books, collections of hadiths of sayings of the Prophet, but this is one that illustrates this value very clearly. And then there's a honor, which is a two-edged sword because on the one hand, honor is a very positive concept when applied in moderation and the right situation, and on the other hand, it can lead to horrible behavior and horrible crimes. And here I have highlighted some aspects of Muslim honor which I think distinguish it from the Anglo-Saxon and European continental tradition of honor. For example, Arab Muslim honor is collective. It's centered on the family and the tribe and the ummah, the Muslim community, rather than on the individual, as is the case in the West. And a person's actions are judged based on their impact on the group reputation rather than vice versa. Sorry. And then Arab Muslim honor is tied not so much to integrity and honesty, but to strength, virility, to protection of their women's chastity, and to their own reputation. So losing face is a critical component of this sense of honor, and it leads even to crimes of honor, where, according to statistics, 90% of young women or who are victims of crimes of honor actually committed no dishonorable act, but since their reputation was impugned publicly, the men of the family had to avoid losing face by basically meting out the punishment that they are seen sense to deserve according to this fear of losing face within the community. And this is the third point, so that Arab Muslims' behavior, women's behavior regarding chastity, modesty is central. And I see this in school. For instance, insults are freely given, but as soon as you touch the honor of the sister or the mother, it gets very quickly to physical blows. And this is something that they're even very assimilated, very educated boys with background in the Middle East indulge in with the support of their parents, because the honor of the mothers and the sister is uh, on a level with the honor of the Prophet. And then exactly the fourth point, which I mentioned in passing about behavior at school, is that this when your honor is impugned, you need to act, not just speak to restore it. And public apologies are, I wouldn't say common, but acts of retribution are common either by cursing or by even physical violence. And it's very interesting that losing face is something which I see in everyday life as a teacher. And I found actually a pretty good way of diffusing physical conflicts. When two boys are fighting, previously teachers would move them apart, would tell them step behind. But the problem there is that as soon as the first student takes a step behind for the first time, he loses face. So the other taunts him, and then that escalates the conflict. So I basically realized that if instead of telling them to walk back, you tell them to walk to the side in a different direction, they basically get further from each away from each other without losing face, because they're not retreating, they're moving to the side. And that diffuses most altercations without any escalation, which happens when one side is taunted because it basically was stepped back before the other side. And then another important point is that the Western concept of honor has evolved significantly. Nowadays, for example, you only in the West, I think it's a concept that is prevalent only, I would say, in maybe the southern states and maybe in the Midwest of the United States and in Eastern Europe and in some places of Southern Europe. But in Northern Europe and on the East Coast and West Coast of America, I don't think the concept of honor that our great grandparents were familiar with is even known to younger generations. Whereas the Arab Muslim traditional concept of honor is very strongly ingrained because it has a religious sanction, which it never had in the Christian tradition. I would say that honor is a concept which is derived from an aristocratic military tradition. And since aristocratic military values have been waning during the last century or so in throughout the Western world, the value of honor has steadily and clearly declined, whereas in the Muslim world it is still very much alive, especially in the Arab world. And then we go to the third point, which is basically, if I'd like to highlight the difference between Jews and Arabs by showing, illustrating an example of when I was both interested in Islam and in Judaism. And when I was in the mosque one Friday, there was wandering preachers from the Tabligh Jamaat movement, which is a movement of people who go from mosque to mosque, from city to city, holding talks after Friday prayers. And one of them came and explained how beautiful it was that even though Muslims are poor on earth, if they pray and obey Islam in paradise, they will be blessed with all kinds of material, physical, and spiritual delights. And I told this wandering sheikh that I found it dishonest to obey Allah and Islam for the sake of an afterlife reward. The sheikh was completely shocked that I, a young nobody, would challenge his preaching in front of everyone. And the people around, apologized to the sheikh for my impudence and quietly, accompanied me outside of the mosque. A year earlier, when I was in Jerusalem at the Heritage House, which is sort of a hostel where young secular kids are sort of brought to know Judaism better, a Haredi rabbi came and held a speech about all these secular kids. Most of them, except for myself, were hopefully Jewish. And he convinced them that it was worthwhile returning to Jewish observance because all these great Western thinkers had been Jewish. So he mentioned Freud, he mentioned Einstein, he mentioned Marx and Durkheim, that they had all been Jewish. And I told him, look, but Rabbi, they all rejected religion. Why are you telling us to be religious when all these great Jews were not religious? So the rabbi, of course, gave us an answer replying to my objection. And the first thing after he gave his address was to come to me and gave me his contact, his business card, so that I would basically enroll in his yeshiva. And this illustrates pretty much the difference in openness to debate, to dialectics in the contemporary Muslim world and in the contemporary Jewish world. Now, I would like to add something which is sort of a self promotion as an author, but I think it's relevant and interesting because I wrote a novel which I haven't been able to publish. It's called The Mahdi and the Messiah. It's a utopian satire, and it's about a young Saudi king who at Yale gets exposed to Yiddishkeit through a rabbi who runs a Jewish club, which is actually based on a true story, based on my life story. And he basically orchestrates the conversion of Palestinians to Judaism and the conversion of Jews to Islam. And this is what he writes when he, in chapter 11, discovers Yiddishkeit. So, New Haven, May 2022. I want to summarize some qualities that distinguish Jewish from Saudi traits to help my people match Israel's accomplishments. Firstly, Jewish thinking is counterintuitive. Whereas we Saudis assume that if Khalid plays tennis with his servant Murad, both are doing the same thing, a religious Jew will immediately grasp that they are doing opposite things. Khalid buys a service as an employer, while Murad sells his time as an employee. Secondly, Jews value results, whereas we value intentions. An imam will teach that donating to charity for PR purposes is sinful, but a rabbi will insist that a righteous action is meritorious, even if it is done for the wrong reason. Thirdly, Muslim students rarely know each other's friends, mosques, and imams. Jewish students, no matter where they come from, appear to be connected by common friends, acquaintances, and rabbis. Jews even have a technical term for these networks. Saudi policymakers should take the moniker Jewish geography very seriously. And then, however, some Jewish idiosyncrasies are truly baffling. I cannot fathom why religious Jews like David and Rabbi Lacks, who pray and bless at every turn, make irreverent remarks about prophets, rabbis, and even joke about God. Rabbi Lacks once quipped that the prophet Yusuf, peace be upon him, needed no MBA to turn around the Pharaoh's finances. How can a man of God talk about a prophet in such a chummy fashion? I can't understand why his students don't get upset at him. And yet both Simha and David scrupulously refuse to touch any food lacking a kosher stamp. How can one be more concerned with drinking a latte at Starbucks than with showing reverence towards the prophets? I'm also unsettled by Jewish fondness for arguments. Among us Arabs, Europeans, and WASP Americans, agreement is a hallmark of good breeding. Jews, on the other hand, appear to think that the more distinguished your lineage, the better you should be at demolishing everyone else's ideas. In the beginning, out of politeness, I used to agree with everyone at the Shalom Society. Nowadays, I know better and disagree on purpose, just to delight my interlocutors with a verbal fencing match. So, this is my short talk. Thank you very much. Shukran and Toda Rabah. This is a hopeful picture of my friend Rabbi Dr. Yaakov Nagin with Haji Ibrahim Ahmed Abu Al Hawa from Jerusalem, hugging in a picture that is one of the hopeful pictures of the last decades coming from the Holy Land. So now we can open it for discussion and questions and answers and criticism, of course. I'm more than happy to hear your challenges because many of you here are Jews, so you're fully entitled to criticize anything I said.
Okay, great. Rafael, would you mind? Can you please unshare your screen?
Yes, immediately. I wish I can learn to do this. Once again, I might need to watch a YouTube tutorial to do it, but here I can do it. Okay. Oh God. Let's see. One second. I, oh
I
yeah,
think you might be able
I did it. I did it. Okay, here. Yes.
Is that you characterized both of these groups in different ways without being at all judgmental.
Yes, that's what I learned from the Muslims.
So Nakshan has his hand raised.
Um, if I if okay, you mentioned lots of sources from the Sharia, from the Islamic scriptures
Yes.
about mostly of ethical nature. My question would be, how is this relevant while in many instances, in many communities, from what I know and from what I understood, the Sharia is not really a normative legal code. What I understood that in many Muslim communities, the Sharia is, oh, let's say like this, the loyalty to maybe older tribal legal code or legal or behavior or ethical behavior just overrides the Sharia. There are many ways there, from what I'm told, there are many um, mm, practices that contradict the Sharia very explicitly, and they're just common practice. So, what relevance does it have?
I mean, you're right. For example, Bedouin law and custom sometimes oftenly violates Sharia principles. Even the Pakhtunkhwala, which is the code of honor of behavior of the Pathans in Pakistan and in Afghanistan, is often conflicts with normative Sharia. But here I'm talking about.
No, even serious things, things like suicide bombings.
No, I mean, suicide bombings, there are different interpretations, but the consensus of the scholars is that you cannot kill yourself. But if you kill an enemy of Islam while killing yourself, you're basically sacrificing your life like a soldier in fighting a hard battle. But regarding your question, I'm talking about that these habits are observed not because all Muslims have read the Sharia and scrupulously observe it, but because it got incorporated across the centuries into the natural habits of the culture. And I'll give you an example from the Jewish world. I was in a restaurant in Tel Aviv, not kosher, with a family that was not religious. And the child, who was around 3 or 4 years old, asked me, "Why do you have two fingers?" And because I was born with two fingers, and I told him because God made me that way. And he asked me why did he do so, and so on and so on. And every time he asked me why. Now this little kid didn't study in a yeshiva, didn't know the Talmud, but he had already by his young age absorbed the values and the habits of Jewish culture, of Jewish law, of always questioning, of always digging behind every answer in a way that made me laugh because it was clear that this 3 or 4 year old boy in his socialization already had centuries of religious tradition which he had unconsciously absorbed, even though his parents were obviously not religious. And this is what I'm arguing is the case vis-a-vis these norms of good manners in the Muslim world. It's not because Muslims know all the injunctions of Sharia by heart that they observe them, but because in the course of generations of centuries they were assimilated by many, if not most, Muslims.
Thank you very much.
So I can't get my machine to raise my hand here, but I did have a question.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. First, thank you for the presentation.
Yeah.
It was very interesting, and I really enjoyed your story about how to reconcile the two Muslim boys who were fighting without either one of them losing face. So here's my question. It seems to me that there are a lot of Arabs in Gaza
Yes.
who likely oppose Hamas. But on the one hand, they're afraid of voicing their opposition. On the
Yes.
other hand, the norms of Islam that you were describing are playing some sort of role here where they think that it would be very inappropriate for them to criticize other Muslims. And I wonder how to get around that. On the one hand, in the West Bank, there's a certain amount of violence between the different factions.
Yes.
The Jihad, Islamic Jihad, Hamas, and the Palestinian Authority. But they will kill each other, but they won't actually criticize each other.
That's actually true. And this is something where, I have to give credit to the enemies of Israel that they basically don't sell themselves as cheaply because, in principle, Fatah could go to America, to Europe, condemning Hamas and vice versa. But even though, as you say, they fight bitterly within themselves in public, they don't wash their dirty laundry in public. And this is something which has its strengths because whereas Jews and Israelis are basically going around the world saying that Israel is an apartheid state, that it's committing genocide, that Netanyahu is a war criminal, you won't find any Arabs, let alone Palestinians, who do likewise. And it's not just because they're afraid of retribution, because believe me, if a Palestinian, even an Arab Israeli, were ready to go from Jewish community center to Jewish community center, basically repeating the narrative of the Israeli government, he or she could make a very good living. But it's just culturally unacceptable to do so, which is, on the one hand, it leads to basically a compact front in times of conflict. On the other hand, it also leads to the lack of self-reflection and self-criticism, which has actually contributed to making the Jewish people and Israel such a democratic and intellectually vibrant community. So on the one hand, in times of war, you have the benefits of this, basically, let's not screw each other in public, but in across the generations and in society, it leads to intellectual and political stagnation, I think.
So my question is really how to overcome it, because
Um,
there are I mean I know you in some sense you can't overcome a tradition like this, but how could it be made possible for those who oppose Hamas to somehow do so in a way that they would uh, not be perceived as opposing fellow Muslims or causing other problems. You did so well with the two students
yes.
who you were able to
Yes.
separate. I'm hoping that you'll have some suggestions here about what to do in this very similar situation.
I mean, I think the solution is in any ways not leading to a situation where these
Right.
people who basically support the West and Israel's demands for better governance in Gaza to lose their face. I remember there was one episode that was really cringe, actually two episodes. One was Mahmoud Ahlan was a rival for the leadership of the Palestinian Authority. He was willing to reach out to Israeli officials. The Israeli officials hosted him and had him at a long table where you had a lot of Israeli flags and no Palestinian flags. So there, basically, he completely lost his face. And also, for example, the crown prince of Iran, who came to Israel in a show of solidarity with Israel, and right while he was there, many members of the Israeli government said that Israel should support the separatist demands of Azerbaijanis in Iran, and that completely made him lose face. Also, the Netanyahu, when he told CNN, I believe, that the Saudis didn't give two hoots about the Palestinians. This was a few months before October 7th. He completely embarrassed the King of Saudi Arabia and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and he paid a high price because, after all, after that interview, the Saudi king returned the favor by basically dissing Netanyahu and saying that he had no hurry to reach an agreement with Israel. So it's very important in any situation not to put the other side in a position of losing face in front of their own people, because it's a very hard thing to swallow the existence of Zionism, the existence of a Jewish state, let alone normalization, and aggravating this tension and this difficulty by leading them to the appearance or even the obvious circumstance of losing faith is extremely negative, especially for Israel, because losing faith is something that is not forgotten nor forgiven in the Muslim world, and especially the Arab world.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to give a quick message to our participants that I went ahead and put a link in the chat. Maybe some of you are a little bit shy and you have a question, but you don't want to ask on Zoom. And so I've went ahead, if you want to write your question, go ahead and open that link in the chat and we'll come back to it. Meanwhile, Altay has his hand raised, so please speak, Altay.
Thank you, Sophia. Well, I do not really have a question, but a big thank you. I really love your talk. I find it very inspiring. I'm the son of a Sunni Turk and a Catholic German mother, and I would now consider myself a very secular person, an academic, and I have had insights in many different well, spheres of lives and religion only very late. In my life, I got to know also Jews in Europe and more so in North America. And I can very strongly relate to the stories you have told, but also how you have underpinned them with very, very meaningful sentence quotations from the scriptures. And what I love so much is not just that you showed the willingness to first see the good and the positive in the other, who is a potential enemy or a potential friend, but the way you approach it, you make it, hey, this is a potential friend. I love this approach. Second, I love your approach because when I start teaching my Greek history lecture, my Roman history lecture, I always try to explain, convince, yes, preach to my students. We are doing this first in order to understand rather than to judge. Historical studies, but I would extend it, studies of the world, they should be in the first place to understand rather than to judge. And what you have delivered is a wonderful example of how the benefit of this approach. You were helping us understand very effectively how we may actually make sense of many experiences we may have had in so many different settings of life. And when we develop that understanding, our judgment will be a more positive and a more constructive one. And our judgment will be one that may lead to much better outcomes than just, well, carrying your judgment already into the investigation, which means being biased. And of course, the outcome of a biased investigation is a biased result leading to much good. So I really want to commend you for that. Thank you for that. I hope your talk will be online, and I will recommend it to friends, to students, to my family in the future. Questions, though, do remain, and questions have been addressed, namely what to make out of this knowledge and deeper understanding to find a way to overcome this horrible war, and even beyond the war in Gaza and Israel, the tensions between the religious communities worldwide. That is still something open, but I do think that you have given us a good indication and much help to continue with some optimism on this path. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Altay. What adab, what brilliant Menschlichkeit, humanity in these words. And it's encouraging to see professors like you who basically have the virtues of both an academic and my favorite priests and rabbis when I grew up.
Thank you, Altay. And now, George.
Yes, I want to add some, let's say, proposal to speculate in some direction, actually to try to understand that since we are talking about Judaism and Muslims, we have to look also what is happening in the Western world, where Catholicism is or Orthodoxism is prevailing, and we have to admit that there is no ethical dimension in the Western society, and the burden of the ethical judgment was left for philosophy. And what is doing philosophy, and this is very interesting, I presume, philosophy is going from ideology which was lately manifesting in Hegel and even in Heidegger, but after that it goes, the Western philosophy goes towards analyzing the immediate stream of life, the phenomenon in the phenomenology, and now in the new phenomenology of Hermann Schmidt, they are intending to think what is happening in real life in primitive present. This is one of the concepts of Hermann Schmidt. And why do I think that this is important to note? If we are trying to, as my predecessor said, also it's very important to understand what is about in living, what is about in life, and not to hang on ideology and concepts and forget to understand what is really happening to everybody in his real life. And now the new phenomenology and Western philosophy is trying to get conscious about all those very specific aspects of understanding real life. Maybe this could be a way of for better understanding of all human values, starting with understanding what is your insertion in present and not your insertion in a past, which is more than often it's just a virtual presence. It's not a real presence. And of course, what you are doing when you are trying to insert in your present, you are using all values that humanity provided to you by conceptual, practical, and also sort of procedures, including the more speculative philosophy. So this is, I presume, it will be interesting to study and to think about what if understanding real life will be help of much help to let people understand each other. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Chirita. I would say I love I'm not a big fan of Marx, but I love his famous aphorism that philosophy must be the study and understanding of the real world. And I have to say in this respect that I disagree with you that philosophy is the linchpin of morality and ethics. I think religion is much more because religion has an emotional reach that philosophy usually doesn't. And the no reason I think this is true is because in a Holocaust group on social media, I once asked, how many records are there of people saying that they defended the Nazis, fought the Nazis, or helped persecuted minorities in the name of Kant's categorical imperative? I waited weeks and weeks. No one replied until someone said, former teacher of Hans Jonas said that without Kant, he wouldn't have been able to resist the Nazis. Compare this number with everyone who resisted Nazism in the name of their religious faith or their political ideology, such as communism or socialism or basically secular humanistic values. And you realize that I think philosophy has a great amount of influence, but in the everyday choices and behaviors of individual, it doesn't reach the emotional core that lies at the heart of irrational actions such as rescuing Jews or gays or Romas during a time such as the Holocaust.
So we have a question in the chat and we have some questions on our Google Sheet. So first I'll ask for Dilip. Dilip asks, Jews seem to enjoy getting immersed in arguments. What is the genesis of this?
Oh God, this is a very intimate personal question, but I was always very argumentative because I just since I couldn't run very well, I could just run with my tongue, and I learned to do that at a pretty early age. So when I met Jews, it was I found my tango partner, and there I just it went on, and I think it's my wife thinks, and my mother especially thinks that it exactly is, I have completely exaggerated my love of argument.
All right. So the first question on our Google Sheet, Rafael, you spent much time explaining that the Muslims are very polite, but general intolerance to minorities is quite prevalent in Muslim communities, such as intolerance to Jews, Christians, and Hindus. How should we understand this contradiction? Thank you.
It is not a contradiction because the ultimate goal of all these values is to expand and strengthen Islam. So manners, especially towards non-Muslims, are a way of presenting themselves and their culture and their religion in the best possible light. And that is why the niceness and politeness of Muslims is inversely proportional to their proportion of their population. In a country where the most very devout Muslim, non-Muslim minorities will be made to feel uncomfortable, and there are many Sharia injunctions that mandate uh, like discrimination and even degrading of non-Muslims. Whereas when Muslims are in a position where they have to present the advantages and the beauty of Islam by with their words and their behavior, they will do so in a very delightful way, in a way that is in harmony with the teachings of the surahs which were revealed in Mecca during the first part of the Prophet's revelations.
Thank you. Here's the second. You suggest that Jewish people should not put Muslims in embarrassing positions. Doesn't that give them an unfair advantage, considering how unflattering they often are to Jews?
No, that was not what I said. I said that Jews should learn from Muslims and especially from Arabs the interpersonal skills, because I think that, there's an anecdote I want to tell you, which I think is very interesting. I write for Arutz Sheva, which is a very right-wing Israeli newspaper, and once I went because I had crafted together with a Palestinian professor a peace plan which I think was fair to both sides. It's called the Dajani Peace Plan, and I contacted the legation, the Palestinian representative office in Berlin, and secured an appointment with the ambassador. The ambassador was a very charming, polite, friendly lady. She served me coffee with a grace that I haven't seen since Queen Elizabeth didn't invite me to Buckingham Palace. And it was only after I left that I realized, by thinking about what she said, that she had absolutely no interest in anything I said. She just wanted to know what the enemy was up to, but she behaved with such a grace and such a savoir faire that I really had a wonderful time the whole 60 minutes I spent with her. Contrast that with a friend of mine who is a leading NGO activist, think tank director in Israel, who once I had an appointment, and during our conversation, he started using dental floss in front of me in the video cam. I was like so appalled. And then I sort of switched to Jewish thing and said, oh, what he actually means is that I'm like a son to him. But still, I mean, the difference in the treatment you get from someone who sees you as an enemy on the Arab side and someone who sees you as a friend on the Israeli side can sometimes be really quite atrocious. And this is where I would really urge Israelis to learn from their neighbors, because there are things they do extremely well. And these interpersonal skills, this savoir faire, is something that Sabras have a lot to learn from their neighbors.
Thank you. One more question to respond to Ed's question. I've noticed that Arabs have respect for kings and that this can serve as an effective balance to their respect for imams. Would a king be able to control the situation in Gaza in spite of Hamas?
Well, depends which king, but as if any king is seen as being a stooge of the Americans and especially the Zionists, then that won't last. Anything that the Arab world will do will be with money and in a way that doesn't bring them in disrepute. They will never have a situation where basically Arab Muslim soldiers of self-respecting Arab Muslim states will be seen as serving under the command or under the behest of Israel or of any power that is seen as inimical to Muslims and to the reputation and the honorable honor of Islam.
So I'm going to ask my question, and that is there any practice in the Muslim world of reconciliation or how to overcome this losing of faith? Like, is there any gracious way to resolve the losing of faith?
Well, this is something where Nachshon can help me. I know that in the Bedouin tribes, when you have a conflict between tribes, you have a sulha, which is basically a meeting where the chieftains and the elders of the communities meet and discuss and agree on how, there will be compensation or apologies in a way that does not necessarily involve violence and often ends violence, because without these sulhas or these reconciliation talks, the situation can escalate and be carried from generation to generation with a great deal of bloodshed, even though the initial conflict might have been relatively small or trivial. Now, Sean, would you like to add something, please, to this, given your experience and knowledge?
No, thank you. It's not very deep. It's just there are things that I understand about, being the nominal law, and then the practice may be very different. But I just that is just a very general sense that I have. Thank you.
Okay.
Are there other questions? I also would, if not, I would, could you give us a brief account of the solution of the peace vision that you outline in your book?
It's not. It's actually the only peace solution I think is viable. Basically, it's a bit sounds absurd, but it's basically that I envision that in the coming years, the rabbinate, to solve the problem of conversions having different standards in different countries of the world, introduces standardized tests which you take online from all over the world in order to be recognized as an Orthodox Jew and be entitled to immigrate to Israel. And basically, the Saudi prince gets a corrupt rabbi in Oklahoma to enroll all Palestinians into this conversion program and hacks the interface of the website of the Israeli rabbinate so that everyone passes the conversion exams with flying colors. And then the rabbis are more than happy to have 4 or 5 million new Yids who keep kosher, who will vote for Shas and the religious parties. And the Israeli government is faced with a terrible situation because if they say no, we won't accept these Orthodox conversions, then they'll be basically admitting they're really racist. Whereas if they accept it, Israel will be overwhelmed by 5 million converts, which would be the end of Israel as the Jewish state we know now. So basically, the Israeli government takes advantage of the fact it's very easy to convert to Islam. You only need to say one sentence, acknowledging that there is one God and that Muhammad is the prophet. And in Arab lessons, which take place in Jewish public schools, they get all pupils and their relatives to practice the profession of faith as an Arab speaking exercise. And over in a matter of couple of weeks, all secular Israelis have become Muslim without realizing it. And then the Knesset passes a law declaring that Israel is now the Islamic and democratic state of the Bani Israel. And suddenly, all Muslims become far more Zionist than even the Zionist Organization of America. And there is peace and happiness. I won't tell you how the book ends, this utopian satire ends, but believe me, it ends well for the Bani Israel and for the world. So if anyone wants a PDF copy of the novel, I'm more than happy. And you're not forced to read it to the end, but if you know any publisher or anyone who is interested in a very iconoclastic book, I'm more than happy for your mediation, and you'll get a chip of royalties and film rights profits. Okay.
Oh, Nakshan has another question, please.
Yeah. I don't want to take over, but I still have this. You mentioned it's an interesting concept. You mentioned the idea of honor being very central to Muslim or Arab culture. I think it was Charles Taylor who said that we used to, as the West, used to be very similar to this, being very focused on honor. And then we went to dignity, then we went to respect, and we may be in the age of comfort right now. What would you say to the idea that the idea of honor comes from, at least to an extent, from a religious point of view, one being that in both or in all the three Abrahamic religions, the person is created in the image of God, and then second, that the person basically represents his God in the world, and therefore needs to act with certain amount of dignity or honor, rather.
Thank you very much. I think there's a difference in the meaning of the word honor in different languages. If you use the word kavod in Hebrew, it translates not as honor, but as dignity, as human dignity. Kavod abriya, kavod adam. It's not the same sense of honor in the Arab and even in the Spanish, Latin American sense of the word, or even the Sicilian sense of the word, which is more a matter of personal eh, reputation rather than behavior. It's a matter of connected to the dichotomy between shame and guilt cultures. And dignity is more connected to guilt, and honor is more connected to shame cultures. And I would also say that honor is actually a byproduct of a militaristic aristocratic ethos. And that the reason in the West we have gradually shed this sense of honor is because we're no longer as aristocratically and militaristically minded as our forefathers were. And it is only in societies that still value military virtues and aristocratic virtues that honor plays a significant role in the West. And I understand this sense because I grew up in Latin America in an age where had almost feudal social structures and where the idea of the aristocracy of the 19th century Europe were very much alive and where the sense of honor was very much alive. And because I grew up part of my youth in Mexico, I can understand Arab culture very well. And I have a theory which hasn't been vindicated by any anthropological studies, but that if you want to know which cross-cultural affinities there are, look at in which countries soap operas are exported to. If American soap operas are popular in Northern Europe, in the Arab world, they wouldn't last very long. But Mexican soap operas are very popular in the Arab world. Turkish ones are popular not just in the Arab world, but also in Southern Europe. So here you see like where there are cultural overlaps, because ordinary people only watch real life stories of people they can identify and have a feeling for. And soap operas are the perfect venue, and their acceptability within a broader public are the perfect venue to test these cross-cultural affinities at a deeper, more emotional, more visceral level, I would say.
Thank you. George has a question. Go ahead, George.
Yes, indeed. It's very interesting idea that people are representing the God, so they have to behave with dignity. But if you think that in order to behave regarding to God, you have to understand what is God. And in the second place, you have to see that God is appearing to you in the reality, in the immediate and direct reality. So this is a combination of representing God with dignity and understanding what God is by understanding your reality. And I think that this is the better combination that could offer a solution for everybody and also for God Himself in order to let Him be understood by everybody and let them behave in good peace together.
Professor Chirita, you said God himself. You might be misgendering God, I just want to warn you.
Sorry, I didn't got you. If you want to repeat.
Yeah, you might have given, you said God himself, you might have given God the wrong personal pronoun.
Yes, indeed. I know that Jewish people, Judaism is very prudent in talking about God. This is not happening in Europe. We are trying to discuss a lot about him. But however, this is another point of interest because this could also be a very fine tuning of understanding what does God represent to the whole humanity. We have this kind of attitude in Judaism, in Western philosophy and religion. It's different. We are very close to God by Christianity and so on and so on. So everybody can get anything, everything which is very significant to this talk, to kind of talk about what is important in this world. Indeed, you are right.
Professor Chirita, my personal opinion is there is truth and there is dross in every religious tradition.
Very nice indeed. Thank you.
Okay, I think there are no more questions.
Okay.
Gabriel, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, well, I'm sure that people will think of more questions as the week progresses, because this is a very, very interesting talk. I'm just wondering if there's any other people as rude as the Jewish people, but that will be for another session, perhaps. Um, but we enjoy being rude.
Yeah.
It's a pastime. It's a pleasant pastime.
I mean,
Um, Thank you really so much for this talk, and thanks to everyone for coming and participating. And announcement will be coming out for our next meeting, which will be sometime in February.